Good evening, everybody. I'm Diya Rao Jaini, a recent graduate from St. Stephen's College, and I'll be presenting my research on the marginalization and revival of traditional Indigenous knowledge as part of my mid-internship presentation here at the Maritime Research Center. Some key features that I'll be touching upon in my presentation are the limitations of my study. Secondly, I'll be moving on to defining Indigenous knowledge, and then the primary issues that that come up from this definition, which is the nexus between knowledge and power and a disjunct between policy and reality. And I'll be ending with my recommendations for the way forward. So, in terms of limitations, of course, there is through in my research there is a reliance on English language secondary sources, and secondly, I operate with a broader understanding of Indigenous knowledge in that I don't really go into the regional aspects um, of this Indigenous knowledge that I'm referring to. So I essentially look at Indigenous knowledge as a larger whole. Now, moving on to the definitions of Indigenous knowledge, it is essentially defined as local knowledge, which is unique to a given culture or society, and then of course forms the basis for local level decision making. And this contrasts with the international knowledge system, which is otherwise generated by universities and research institutions. There has, of course, been wide historiography about the definitions of Indigenous knowledge, which I'll be touching upon as well. So, Martha Johnson looks at traditional environmental knowledge as being built across generations through groups of people, and of because of living in close contact with nature. And this then includes a system of classification, empirical evidence, and observations about local environment, and a system of self management which governs the use of resources. And therefore, we see how it's not just based on observations, wisdom, and folklore, but does have some sort of structure to it. Now, the quantity and quality of traditional environmental knowledge, of course, also varies amongst community members, changing with age, gender, social status, profession, etc. And it is important to acknowledge that it is rooted in the past, but this is not to say that it is not cumulative and dynamic, because it uses earlier experiences to adapt to new technological and socio-economic changes. It gained international recognition through documents like the World Conservation Strategy and Our Common Future, which are reports which emphasize the need to use environmental expertise of local people in managing local resources. Now, sustainable management of natural resources can only be achieved by developing a science based on the priorities of these local people and creating a technological base which blends both traditional and modern approaches to solving problems. Next, Vander Bleikand looks at how essentially ideas, experiences, and information generated either locally or elsewhere, but it's transformed by locals and then incorporated into the local lifestyle. And Chadwick focuses on how the people environment interaction shapes Indigenous knowledge, in that stakeholders act in response to complex physical, social, and economic conditions which shape the environment. And therefore, we look at the members of these Indigenous communities not as passive receptors, rather as active stakeholders in the shaping of the Indigenous knowledge. Now, from this discussion on the definitions, I identified two major issues, which is firstly the nexus of knowledge and power, and secondly, a disjunct between policy and reality. So, in discussing the knowledge and power nexus, we see how, firstly, the objective of discussing this distinction between traditional and scientific knowledge is to A, understand how knowledge is categorized, B, how these categories are employed, and C, the limitations of their use. Now, while traditional knowledge is categorized by terms like local, indigenous, and traditional, all of which connote different emphases, scientific knowledge is associated with prediction, rationality, and testable explanation. So, Mazzocchi notes a tendency to pedestalize modern science and reinforce hierarchies, which exist because of the attribution of traditional knowledge consisting solely of wisdom and stories, and therefore lacking some sort of objectivity and rationality. And therefore, he highlights the need to understand that Western science and traditional systems follow radically different ways of knowledge creation and validation. And therefore, analyzing one using the criteria prescribed by another is very precarious. The possibilities of collaboration between local communities and policymakers need to be further studied to allow for the development of more inclusive and locally informed policies. Next, we look at the disjunct between policy and reality. So, the rise of mechanized fishing, particularly through the use of bottom trawlers, leads to declining fish stocks, which are then further exacerbated by pollution from coastal resorts and hotels. These are all provisions of India's policy to boost its blue economy. On recognizing this, the Government of India drafted the National Policy on Marine Fisheries in 2017, which aimed to address habitat conservation and secure tenure rights and livelihoods for traditional fishers. However, its implementation has been limited by the lack of a detailed action plan and insufficient budgetary support. And these limitations isolate and disenchant local communities, making it almost impossible for them to contribute to policy formulation. Another related aspect to this is that of coastal commons, which are natural resources and spaces which can be accessed by all members of a community. Now, while many legal frameworks have provisions for coastal protection and governance, institutions like the Kadakodi or the Kadal Kodati, which translates to sea courts in Kerala, and Ur Panchayats of Tamil Nadu, are key in determining rules to guide community interactions. Now, with industrialization also extending to coastal land, modern policy increasingly isolated these local institutions. And so, coastal governance, which was once rooted in community systems and traditional knowledge, which aimed to balance ecological security and the claims of different users to this land, is now simply a process to ease the capture of space and resources by a few private companies. And this has been summarized by Dr. Aparna Sundar, who says, and I quote, not only do they undermine the traditional rights of fishing communities, but they are premised on the weakening or undoing of hard won legislations which gave communities some form of protection, unquote. So, after having identified these issues, I do suggest some recommendations for the way forward. So, firstly, in terms of the co production of knowledge, this has already been seen in terms of a study in Kerala titled Reconciling Indigenous Knowledge and Modern Scientific Knowledge, which was carried out by the Mangalore Research Center as well as the CMFRI, which is the Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute, which shows essentially the scientific rationale behind indigenous knowledge. And some examples that were quoted in the study were essentially that when there is a strong fishy odor in the water, this indicates a large concentration of fish because of the smell of mucus which is discharged by these fish. And secondly, how jumping prawn indicate a good catch because it shows the presence of predator fish. A second instance where this is seen and the value of this is seen is when is through the work of my fellow intern Varsha Matthew, who through her fieldwork in Cherthala noted how fishermen use stars to navigate before the advent of technology. Now, this in itself shows the use of a scientific method developed through years of observation, and also, of course, an openness and reception to newer technology. Secondly, I suggest encouraging a participatory approach. Now, work on this has also been done by the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and the value in this is then to ensure that information is gathered from both sources of knowledge, and the analysis of this information is also done through both these sources of knowledge or ways of thinking. And under this approach, for instance, a fish ecologist and a holder of indigenous knowledge with expertise in fish can work together from conception to analysis of the data. And this essentially entails that knowledge is exchanged mutually between scientists and holders of indigenous knowledge in plain language with regards to the scientific aspect of the project. Third, I note the value in broadening the approach towards indigenous knowledge, essentially in terms of understanding its unique methodologies and objectives. As I noted before, both modern science and indigenous knowledge have their unique ways of operating and formation of knowledge, and these need to be respected and treated as distinct. Fourth, community based mapping and monitoring, essentially, again, using the community and involving them as active stakeholders in order to ensure that the policies that are created benefit them. And lastly, better archiving and documentation of indigenous knowledge. And this work has been done already by the Dakshin Foundation as well as the Oral History Association of India, not only to give greater legitimacy to indigenous knowledge, but also to commit this knowledge to text to ensure that it is accessible by scholars across the world in order to make sure that indigenous knowledge now is not just brushed off as um, a secondary source, but something that can actually benefit and lead to more comprehensive policy interventions. Thank you.